On the night of August 9th, 43 people gathered on a quiet stretch of beach for what was supposed to be one last summer reunion. By sunrise, one of them would be gone. 26-year-old Olivia Hayes didn't disappear in the wilderness. She didn't vanish on an isolated hiking trail or a deserted highway. She disappeared from the middle of a beach party surrounded by friends. There were bonfires burning, music playing, phones recording, laughter echoing across the shoreline. More than 40 people watched Olivia walk away from the fire just after midnight. She told her friends she wanted a few minutes by the water before heading home. No one stopped her. No one thought they needed to. 5 minutes later, she was gone. Police would spend the next 3 years interviewing every witness, collecting hundreds of videos, reconstructing the night minute by minute, and following every lead they could find. They identified the last stranger seen speaking with Olivia. They searched the shoreline, the dunes, and the ocean. They analyzed phone records, surveillance footage, and digital evidence. Yet despite one of the most exhaustive missing person investigations in the state's history, no one could answer a question that seemed impossibly simple. How does someone disappear from a crowded beach, without a single person seeing it happen? People who knew Olivia almost always described her the same way. She had a habit of making plans for everyone else. Weekend road trips, birthday dinners, last-minute coffee runs. If a group of friends hadn't seen each other in months, Olivia was usually the one who brought them back together. She wasn't loud, she wasn't the center of attention. She just had a way of making people feel included. 3 weeks before she disappeared, she'd accepted her first major marketing job in Chicago. It was the opportunity she'd worked toward since graduating from college. The beach party wasn't just another night out. It was a farewell. One last chance to spend time with the people she'd grown up with before starting a completely different chapter of her life. According to her family, she'd spent that entire week talking about the move. Her apartment boxes were already packed. Her father had promised to help load the truck the following Monday. Her mother had already begun collecting recipes Olivia wanted to learn once she was living on her own. Nothing about her life suggested someone preparing to disappear. If anything, she seemed impatient for the future to arrive. Olivia reached Driftwood Bay shortly after 8 that evening. The sun was beginning to sink beneath the horizon, covering the ocean in long bands of orange and gold. Someone happened to be filming the sunset as she crossed the wooden boardwalk leading onto the beach. For less than 3 seconds, Olivia appeared in the background, smiling as she waved toward a group already gathered around the first bonfire. It would become the first image detectives placed on their timeline. Not because it revealed anything important, because it was the last moment of Olivia's life that felt completely ordinary. She wore denim shorts, white sneakers, and an oversized gray hoodie despite the warm evening air. Around her neck hung a small silver compass pendant, a graduation gift from her older brother. He would later tell detectives she wore it almost every day. The necklace was never recovered. Neither was Olivia. As darkness settled over the beach, the reunion unfolded exactly as everyone remembered. Someone brought a guitar. Another group started a volleyball game that quickly dissolved into laughter. Marshmallows burned over the fire. The fireworks were stacked beside the coolers, waiting for midnight. People wandered freely between the 3 bonfires, catching up with old classmates, sharing stories, taking photographs, and promising to stay in touch this time. By every account, it was a perfect night, which is perhaps why no one noticed the stranger. Not at first. The first confirmed sighting of the stranger wasn't made by a witness. It was made by a camera. 3 days after Olivia disappeared, detectives began collecting every photograph and video recorded at the party. They expected dozens, they received hundreds. Phones had captured almost everything. Friends dancing around the bonfire. Fireworks exploding over the water. People singing badly to songs no one seemed to know all the words to. Individually, none of the clips appeared remarkable. Together, they became a minute-by-minute reconstruction of the night. It was during that reconstruction that investigators noticed him. At 9:14 p.m., he appeared briefly in the background of a group selfie. At 10:02, he walked past a volleyball game carrying a bottle of water. At 11:18, he stood alone near the edge of the firelight, looking out toward the ocean. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't behaving suspiciously. He simply seemed present. The unsettling part wasn't that he appeared in so many recordings. It was that no one remembered him. When detectives enlarged his face and showed it to every person who attended the party, the reactions were almost identical. I've never seen him. I don't know who he is. I don't remember him being there. 43 people. Not one could put a name to the face. At first, investigators believed Olivia had never interacted with him. That assumption lasted less than 24 hours. A second review of the footage revealed something they had missed. At 11:41 p.m., while a friend recorded a short video of the bonfire, Olivia walked into frame carrying 2 bottles of water. She handed one to her best friend, Mia. "Where'd you get these?" Mia asked. Olivia smiled and casually pointed over her shoulder. "The guy by the volleyball net." The camera never turned. The conversation lasted only a few seconds before everyone laughed at something happening off-screen. No one thought about it again. Until detectives realized that the guy by the volleyball net could only have been the unidentified man. It was a completely ordinary interaction. A bottle of water, a few polite words. Nothing more. But it established one crucial fact. The stranger wasn't simply watching Olivia. At some point during the evening they had met. Just after midnight the beach came alive. Fireworks burst overhead, painting the sky in flashes of red, silver, and blue. Nearly everyone instinctively lifted their phones to record. Detectives would later describe those 15 minutes as both the most valuable and the most frustrating part of the entire investigation. So many cameras, so many angles, yet none captured the moment that mattered most. At 12:18 a.m., Olivia appeared laughing beside the largest bonfire. At 12:23, she posed for a group photograph with friends she had known since high school. She stood near the center, one arm around Mia, holding a paper cup in the other. Looking at the picture today, nothing feels unusual, until your eyes drift toward the far left edge of the frame. There he is again, the same man. Not smiling. Not looking at the camera. Looking only at Olivia. At 12:29 a.m., Olivia borrowed Mia's phone to check the time. "My phone's in my bag," she laughed. "I've asked you 3 times already," Mia teased. "I know." Olivia rolled her eyes. "My parents are taking me to lunch tomorrow. If I'm late, my mom's going to steal all my apartment plants." The exchange lasted less than 20 seconds. It became one of Detective Andrea Mercer's favorite pieces of evidence. Not because it solved anything. Because it quietly destroyed one of the earliest theories. People planning to disappear rarely joke about lunch with their parents the next day. 2 minutes later, Olivia looked toward the shoreline. The fireworks had ended. The music had grown louder. Someone nearby had started another speaker, filling the beach with overlapping songs. She laughed, covered one ear, and said, "I'm going to walk down to the water for a few minutes. I'll be right back." No one offered to go with her. No one had any reason to. People had been drifting away from the bonfires and returning all evening. A few-minute walk along the shoreline wasn't unusual. It barely registered. That decision would haunt her friends for years. The last clear video of Olivia was recorded at exactly 12:32 a.m. She was walking barefoot along the water's edge, her sneakers dangling from one hand. The tide rolled gently across the sand. She wasn't running. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She looked exactly like someone taking a quiet walk before heading home. 2 minutes later, the unidentified man entered the frame. He wasn't beside her. He wasn't chasing her. He walked in the same direction, keeping a noticeable distance between them. Far enough apart that they didn't appear to be together. Close enough that detectives couldn't ignore the coincidence. It would be the last time either of them appeared clearly on camera. Over the next 8 minutes, something happened on that stretch of beach. 43 people would spend years trying to remember it. Detectives would spend years trying to reconstruct it. And despite all the technology available, those 8 minutes would become the only part of the night that no one could fully explain. At 12:42 a.m., Olivia reached the northern end of the beach. The music from the bonfires had faded into a distant murmur. Ahead of her stood an abandoned lifeguard tower that had been closed for years after storms weakened its foundation. Most people ignored it. It was little more than a weather-beaten platform overlooking the water. One final video captured Olivia slowing as she approached it. The recording lasted just 12 seconds. She stopped, turned slightly, then smiled. Not a broad smile. More the polite expression someone gives after recognizing a familiar face. A moment later, the unidentified man stepped into view. He stopped several feet away. Neither of them appeared alarmed. There was no sudden movement. No sign of an argument. No attempt to leave. To anyone watching, it looked like two strangers sharing a brief conversation before continuing on their way. The person recording lowered their phone before another second could be captured. That decision, made without a second thought, would become one of the most frustrating moments in the entire investigation. By 1 a.m., Olivia still hadn't returned. Mia wasn't worried. Not yet. She assumed Olivia had wandered farther down the shoreline to escape the noise. At 1 a.m. she sent a text. "Where did you disappear to?" The message was delivered instantly. It was never opened. 5 minutes later she called. The phone rang. No answer. Another friend tried. Then another. Each call ended the same way. Ringing. Voicemail. Silence. The mood around the bonfire changed almost imperceptibly. Conversations became shorter. People glanced toward the shoreline more often. Someone joked that Olivia had probably found a quieter group to hang out with. No one laughed. At 1:30 a.m., 4 friends walked north carrying the flashlights from their cars. They called Olivia's name between crashing waves. Nothing. The first thing they found was her sneakers, placed neatly side by side just above the wet sand. Not scattered. Not abandoned in haste. Almost as though she'd intended to slip them back on a few minutes later. Several feet away lay her hoodie, folded. Her phone wasn't inside. Neither were her car keys. Those were still in Mia's bag, exactly where Olivia had left them earlier in the evening. "She's messing with us." One of the friends forced a nervous laugh. "Liv." No answer. Only the surf rolling onto the beach. The laughter disappeared. Within minutes, nearly everyone from the party had joined the search. Some combed the dunes. Others walked toward the parking lot. Several waded knee-deep into the water, calling her name into the darkness. By the time the first police officers arrived, the beach had fallen completely silent. Detective Andrea Mercer reached Driftwood Bay just after sunrise. The beach looked very different in daylight. The bonfires had burned themselves out. Plastic cups and folding chairs remained where people had left them. Yellow evidence markers dotted the sand. Mercer always believed that a crime scene tells its story only once. After that, you're relying on memory. She started where Olivia's friends had made their final discovery, the abandoned lifeguard tower. The tide had not yet reached that section of the beach. The sand still held impressions from the night before. There were Olivia's barefoot footprints. They led steadily toward the tower. A second trail larger, likely a man, ran several yards to the right. The two never crossed. They never drifted closer together. They simply continued in parallel. Then, Olivia's footprints stopped. One clear impression. Then nothing. The second trail continued another dozen yards before disappearing into harder packed sand where no usable impressions remained. Mercer crouched beside the final footprint. She had investigated murders, kidnappings, and disappearances for almost 2 decades. She had learned not to call anything impossible. But this was difficult to explain. If Olivia had turned back, there should have been return footprints. If she'd entered the water, there should have been evidence leading to it. If she'd been carried, there should have been signs of a struggle. Instead, it looked as though she had simply ceased to exist. For the first 48 hours, investigators pursued the most obvious explanation. No clothing. No phone, no body. As the hours turned into days, detectives quietly began moving away from the theory they had hoped would be true. Because while accidents often leave questions, they almost always leave evidence. Olivia's disappearance hadn't left any. Only an empty stretch of sand. And a timeline that ended 8 minutes too soon. The investigation changed on the 5th day. Not because investigators found new evidence. Because they looked at the old evidence differently. Detective Mercer asked every member of her team the same question. Forget what happened after Olivia disappeared. She paused. What happened before? The room was quiet. Everyone had become so focused on the disappearance that they had stopped examining the hours leading up to it. Mercer wanted to know everything. Who spoke to Olivia? Who photographed her? Who stood beside her? Who entered her world even briefly? By the end of the afternoon, one name, or rather, one face, kept resurfacing. The unidentified man. Technology succeeded where memory failed. Investigators synchronized more than 200 videos using their timestamps. One by one, they stitched them together into a continuous timeline. For nearly 4 hours, Olivia's movements could be followed with surprising accuracy. She laughed with friends, played volleyball, helped build one of the bonfires after it began to collapse, danced to songs she barely knew. At no point did she appear frightened, distracted, or eager to leave. She looked exactly like someone enjoying one last carefree night before starting a new chapter of her life. Then the timeline revealed something no witness had remembered. The unidentified man wasn't following Olivia. He wasn't even looking for opportunities to approach her. He seemed to appear wherever she happened to be. Sometimes he entered a frame before she did. Sometimes after. Occasionally they were less than 10 feet apart. Just as often they were separated by an entire crowd. It didn't look like surveillance. It looked like coincidence, and somehow, That made Detective Mercer even more suspicious. Coincidences have limits. This one seemed to have none. 7 days after Olivia disappeared, investigators finally identified him. His name was Evan Morales, 31 years old, an elementary school teacher visiting Driftwood Bay alone during his summer vacation. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no connection to Olivia. When detectives knocked on the door of his rented campsite, Evan appeared genuinely confused. He had already seen the news. He recognized Olivia immediately. "I've been wondering if you'd come." Those were the first words he said. Not because he was confessing. Because he assumed detectives wanted information. He was right. The interview lasted nearly 6 hours. Evan answered every question without hesitation. Yes, he'd met Olivia. Twice. The first time was inside the convenience store before the party. She joked that the line for the register was taking longer than the drive to the beach. He laughed. That was the entire conversation. Hours later, they recognized each other again near the volleyball game. He offered her a bottle of water from the cooler beside him. She thanked him. Nothing more. Detective Mercer then showed him the final video near the lifeguard tower. Evan watched it in silence. "That's us," he said quietly. "What were you talking about?" Mercer asked. "The moon." She frowned. "The moon? I'm an amateur photographer." So was she, apparently. He explained that Olivia had asked where she could get a better photograph away from the bonfire smoke. He mentioned an old stone jetty farther north that offered an unobstructed view across the water. The conversation, he estimated, lasted less than a minute. "Did you walk there with her?" "No." "When was the last time you saw Olivia Hayes?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the table before finally saying. She smiled, said thanks and walked toward the water. For the next 2 days, detectives tried to prove he was lying. They couldn't. Security cameras placed Evan back at his campsite shortly before 1 a.m. His phone connected to the campground's Wi-Fi minutes later. A food delivery receipt confirmed he ordered takeout just after 1:05 a.m. The delivery driver remembered him because the campground entrance was difficult to find in the dark. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Evan Morales had been the last confirmed person to speak with Olivia Hayes. He was also innocent. When detectives released him without charge, public attention shifted overnight. The only suspect the investigation had ever truly focused on had disappeared from the case just as completely as Olivia herself. And with him, the investigation lost its direction. For the first time since that August night, Detective Mercer found herself staring at a board filled with evidence, and realizing she had no idea which piece mattered most. Sometimes solving a case means finding the right suspect. Other times it means asking the right question. Mercer had a feeling she still hadn't asked it. The breakthrough came from something no one had considered important. Not a fingerprint. Not a strand of DNA. Not a security camera. A habit. As Detective Mercer reviewed the witness interviews for what must have been the 10th time, she noticed something strange. Everyone described Olivia leaving the bonfire. No one described watching her continue walking. The distinction seemed insignificant. Until Mercer wrote every statement on a whiteboard. "I saw her heading toward the water. She walked past the driftwood. She said she'd be right back. I remember her taking off her shoes." Each memory ended almost immediately. It was as though every witness had watched only the beginning of the same event. No one had followed it to the end. Mercer called Mia back for another interview. This time she asked a different question. When Olivia walked away, "What were you doing?" Mia frowned. "I don't know. Think about it." She closed her eyes. There were fireworks. "No, that was earlier." The music changed. Mercer waited. And someone shouted my name. Mercer's pen stopped moving. "Who?" "I don't know." "You turned around?" "Yeah." "For how long?" "I honestly couldn't tell you. Maybe 5 seconds." "And when you looked back?" Olivia was farther down the beach. The same question was asked to every witness. Not where was Olivia? Not who was she with? Simply, what were you doing when she walked away? The answers were surprisingly ordinary. One man bent down to pick up a dropped phone. A couple turned to watch 2 friends arguing over music. Someone opened another cooler. Someone else was trying to relight the bonfire. A group burst into laughter after a beach chair collapsed beneath one of their friends. Individually, none of those moments meant anything. Together they revealed something remarkable. Every single witness had been distracted. Not for minutes, for seconds. Tiny, forgettable interruptions. Just long enough to break their attention. Mercer leaned back in her chair. It wasn't the crowd that protected Olivia. It was the crowd that hid her. To test the theory, investigators returned to Driftwood Bay exactly 1 month later. Same day of the week. Same tide. Same moon phase. Volunteers stood where partygoers had been standing. Portable speakers played music at roughly the same volume. The bonfires were rebuilt using photographs from the original scene. Mercer stood near the center of the beach holding a stopwatch. At exactly 12:31 a.m., a volunteer playing Olivia walked toward the shoreline. Another volunteer remained 30 feet behind, following the same path Evan Morales had taken. The reenactment began. Within 30 seconds, Mercer lost sight of them. Not because they had disappeared. Because people naturally moved between her and the shoreline. Someone walked past carrying a cooler. 2 volunteers hugged. Another stepped into her line of sight while filming the ocean. For just a few moments, the beach became exactly what it had been that August night. Busy, loud, unpredictable. By the time Mercer reached the lifeguard tower herself, the volunteer playing Olivia had been standing there for nearly a minute. "I never saw her stop," Mercer admitted quietly. No one else had either. The experiment changed the investigation. It proved something investigators had struggled to explain for weeks. A disappearance didn't need to happen in total darkness. It didn't need to happen in isolation. Sometimes, all it needed was a crowded place where everyone assumed someone else was paying attention. It explained why no witness could agree on Olivia's final movements. It explained why everyone believed they had seen part of the story. It explained almost everything. Almost. There was still one question no reenactment could answer. If Olivia hadn't left voluntarily, who was the last person to stand with her beneath that abandoned lifeguard tower? Because whoever that person was, they had never appeared in a single photograph after 12:36 a.m. Never used Olivia's bank cards. Never touched her phone. Never contacted her family. They had erased themselves from the story, almost as completely as Olivia had vanished from it. For Detective Andrea Mercer, that was the detail she could never let go. People disappear. Evidence disappears. But someone always carries the truth, even if they never speak it aloud. The official search ended 93 days after Olivia Hayes disappeared. The investigation did not. Every few months, Detective Mercer reopened the case file and started again. Not because there was new evidence, because she refused to believe they had looked at the existing evidence the right way. Missing person investigations often end when detectives run out of leads. This one ended because every lead led back to the same 8 minutes. 8 minutes that refused to explain themselves. Years passed. Witnesses moved away. Some got married. Others started families. The beach reunion was never held again. No one wanted to return to the place where their memories had divided into 2 parts. Life before Olivia disappeared, and life after. Mia admitted she could no longer listen to the playlist that had been playing around the bonfire. The first song would transport her back instantly. She could still picture Olivia laughing. Still hear her saying, "I'll be right back." Those 4 words became heavier with every passing year. The evidence was reviewed again and again. Every photograph, every witness statement, every second of video. Eventually, investigators noticed something that had been hiding in plain sight. Not a new clue, a missing one. For nearly 4 hours, Olivia appeared naturally in dozens of recordings. Sometimes at the center of the frame. Sometimes only in the background. But always by accident. She wasn't performing for the camera. She was simply living her evening. Then, after the conversation beneath the lifeguard tower, she vanished completely. There wasn't a single blurred glimpse of her walking away. No accidental appearance in the background of another video. No silhouette farther down the shoreline. Nothing. It was as though she had stepped out of a story while everyone else continued living inside it. Mercer found that detail more unsettling than any footprint or phone record. In a place where hundreds of moments had been captured without anyone trying. Olivia's final moments had escaped every camera. Not because people stopped recording. They hadn't. People were still filming fireworks reflected on the water. Friends were still taking photographs. Someone even recorded themselves walking back toward the parking lot. The cameras never stopped. They simply never found Olivia again. When asked years later what she believed had happened, Detective Mercer chose her words carefully. "I don't think this was an impossible disappearance." She paused before continuing. "I think it only became impossible after 43 different memories replaced one complete truth." That answer frustrated reporters. It frustrated Olivia's family. It even frustrated some of the detectives who had worked beside her. But Mercer never changed it. She believed every witness had been honest. She also believed every witness had been incomplete. Each person had carried away one small piece of the night. No one had witnessed all of it. And somewhere between those missing pieces, Olivia disappeared. Today the case remains officially unsolved. No arrests were ever made. No ransom demand was ever received. No verified sighting of Olivia Hayes has ever been confirmed. Her parents still keep the compass pendant's empty display box on a shelf in their living room. They never bought another one. According to them, there wasn't any point. It belonged to Olivia. And they're still hoping she'll come back for it. Perhaps the strangest part of this case isn't that a young woman disappeared from a crowded beach. It's that more than 40 people were close enough to remember the night. Yet not one of them could remember the moment that mattered most. Sometimes the greatest mystery isn't how someone vanished. It's how the truth can disappear with them. And somewhere, in the memory of a person who may not even realize what they saw, the final 8 minutes of Olivia Hayes' life may still exist, waiting to be remembered.